say such a proton will be highly, such a proton will be de-shielded. Okay, and then nitro group is also given here, and then single bond we have discussed, like with regard to cyclohexane that we have discussed, and then axial and equatorial proton, how they are doing, the shielding and de-shielding effects are seen, that we have discussed. Okay, and then apart from that, cyclopropane and cyclohexane diagrams are given here for your reference, and then you are really interested to go through further find details about this particular magnetic anisotropy, then you please go through all these things. Epoxide is also given, how the shielding and then de-shielding, where are the shielding and de-shielding regions. Okay, so this is again, this slide is again the summary of what we have discussed with regard to the magnetic anisotropy of aromatic compounds. And you can see here that if you have a cyclodihexene, where those protons are really seen at 5.87 or 5.7, whereas the aromatic one, where you have alternative double bonds and then aromatic compound, is exhibiting the chemical shift value at 7.27. So this is primarily because of the fact that it is showing the ring current. So the ring current is primarily responsible for such a huge difference in chemical shift value compared to a cyclohexene and then a benzene, which is an aromatic compound. So similarly, you can also compare the results, like the double bonds. So the double bond in cyclohexane again make a difference. Here the double bonds are alternative, whereas this particular compound, cyclohexane, there are two double bonds and they are in a conjugation. But in this again, it is a two double bonds in cyclohexane, but they are not alternative double bonds. So alternative double bonds, wherever we see that these chemical shift value will be found in the de-shielding region, and if you don't come across this one, we will see at this kind of region, the upfield region. So if there are no alternative double bond, then we will see at a upfield region. Okay. Then yeah, these are another examples, and then I discussed about the aromatic ring, and then if the certain substituents are above the aromatic ring, then such a proton will be, we say it is present in the shielding region, and then such a proton chemical shift value will be found near to the TMS signal, or sometimes even lower than the TMS signal, that is 0 ppm. And then this is one example where benzene ring, you have aromatic benzene ring, and then you have alkyl substituents. As I told you that above the aromatic benzene ring, then we have some kind of substituent, and these will be found. For example, this particular proton will be found at -4.3. And this particular example that we have discussed, it is a 14 pi electron system. Then it is aromatic compound. As you can realize that the protons which are sitting at the top and below the aromatic ring is found in minus region, whereas the other peripheral protons seen at a very high chemical shift value. And then coming to this one, again we have another aromatic system. The NR protons are seen in the very small chemical shift value, and the peripheral protons seen at a very high chemical shift value, right? And then coming to the aromatic compound, okay, this is a 10 pi aromatic compound, right? And then again the same situation, that the two dihydrogens will show at -0.5. Then another, when you come across a non-aromatic compound of this kind, then these chemical shift values are not not really following the chemical shift trends of aromatic compounds, and they follow a general thing. For example, this bicyclic compound, where you have in this region that is 9 and 10 region that you have a connection here, the substituency here, and these two protons are resonating exactly behaving like aliphatic protons. So aliphatic CH2 protons, where they absorb, so they will be seen around 1.2 to 2 ppm, right? So such effect, the aromatic effect, we don't see here because this compound itself anti-aromatic, right? This compound itself anti-aromatic, therefore we don't see what we have observed in this particular case or in the other examples, right? So anti-aromatic compound, this is another anti-aromatic compound, and this is another aromatic compound. So when you compare to this anti-aromatic and aromatic compound, yesterday I have already pointed out that the effects of chemical shift values, the aromaticity, the effect of aromaticity on the chemical shift value is quite opposite. Okay, so that you please remember. So in the case of anti-aromatic compound, peripheral proton will be seen at a lower chemical shift value as compared to the inner chemical shift inner protons. The best example is again another best example. We have discussed many examples, but then this is another very interesting compound. You can see here this is a 10 pi system which is aromatic, and these above these aromatic ring, that two protons are resonating at minus 0.25. The other one is resonating at the minus 1.7. Whereas in the case in this particular case where you have a 12 pi electrons are there, which is anti-aromatic, then these two protons are seen above 10 ppm, while the peripheral protons of the this ring protons are seen 1.2 and then 3.9, which is significantly lower as compared to this above plane protons, right?
In the bottom left corner, that molecules, two hydrogens are giving in minus 0.5, both of the hydrogen. And in right, in the two molecules, one hydrogen is giving at 0.25, another is minus 0.5.
This is a symmetrical molecule, this is a asymmetrical molecule. So you are citing this one, right? These two proton and then this two proton, right? So
yes.
this environment, chemical environment, both side it is same, but whereas this proton has on side you have two double bond, but that this one is having three double bond with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So 5 carbon atom. This side you have only 4 carbon atom. It is asymmetric molecule, right? The electron cloud here, the 3 bonds on this side is electron cloud only 2 bonds. Whereas in this case, you have a different thing.
Okay.
So in this case, you have a carbon atoms, both are same. The delocalization same. The effect of delocalization, both side, either side, it is same. But here it is not the case. That is why we see such kind of difference. Is
okay,
it clear?
Sir. Yes, sir. It is clear.
Okay. And then again, this point also we have discussed that the another few more example what happens exactly with regard to aromatic and anti-aromatic compounds. So again, pyridine systems and then this kind of aniline system that we have. We just go through it. These are very straightforward concepts. So, but then these are some of the examples or the questions are being generally asked in the case of when you are writing the CSR examination. Okay, so I will try to bring more CSR questions as and when it is the topic is covered. So already I have discussed 2 examples of CSR with regard to the same concept, so the magnetic anisotropy, based on that, there are 2 questions I have discussed. So then we'll proceed further, and then with that we have totally covered the magnetic anisotropy in all respects. So you go through it, and then it is really useful subject. Then today we will see, as I said, that more points, and then the one point is that suppose if you have a phenyl ring, and then if the phenyl ring is attached with a vinyl group, so there are 2 conformers are possible. That is, one is the phenyl ring can be in plane with the plane of the vinyl group. On the other hand, the phenyl ring can be perpendicular to the vinyl group. So both possibilities are there. So accordingly, we can have the chemical shift values. For example, if it is in plane, then generally it's in plane. If the phenyl ring is in the same plane, that these 2 protons will be deshielded. These 2 protons will be deshielded. If it is not in plane, like in this case, you can see here the phenyl ring is perpendicular to the plane of this one. Okay, both are perpendicular. So in this case, the chemical shift values will be different. Whereas the other case, the chemical shift values will be more or less same. So you can find the downfield and upfield chemical shift values depending upon the molecular geometry of the phenyl ring with regard to the vinylene ring. And coming to the lone pair, the effect of lone pair on the chemical shift values. So if you have a lone pair, if you have a heteroatoms in the given in any given organic compound, we always find the lone pairs, for example, oxygen and nitrogen. So if a nitrogen is present, we know that the one lone pair is electrons are there, and then these electrons, if it is anti, to the CH bond is, if it is anti to the lone pair heteroatom, then we see that the chemical this particular proton, CH proton, will be found in the upfield region. That means that the small chemical shift value we will encounter. Whereas the other case, like if you come across the lone pair nitrogen atom is syn and anti. I'm sure that most of you know the terminology. So in this case, the CH, the lone pair is here, and then this is anti. So it is opposite way, and then syn, it is the same side. So in this case, because of this type of molecular the resonance, then the electrons will be confined here. Then the hydrogen, CH hydrogen, will have more electron density, and normally we will see at the upfield region. Whereas if it is present in the syn region, it will be found in the de-shielding region. Okay, so that is one thing. And then again, so when you talk about the electron pair, the effect of the lone pair electrons on a heteroatom. So for example, that you can see this particular molecule, CH. So we are going to discuss CH protons, and when it is attached with a hetero atom. So this is one conformer, and then there is another conformer. So we have different conformers are there. Okay, so this is another example where that you have a CH and nearby the heteroatoms are present. So here in this case you have 1 and then 2. Okay, so this is 2 and then 3. Okay, so there are 3 nitrogen atoms in this particular conformer, and then another conformer is, so we have different conformers, and then all these conformers, as you can see here, that everywhere that you have a CH proton, and then the CH is surrounded by a heteroatoms. Now the thing, depending upon this conformation or the conformation of the molecular structure, really determines the chemical shift value. So that's the point. You can see here it is just a it's not in a cyclic form. This nitrogen is not in any acyclic, whereas in this case it is a cyclic form but different conformation. So here, so in this case the conformation is different, and then in this case the conformation is different, and in this case the conformation is different. As you can see, each time we are looking at the chemical shift values of a CH proton. In this case it is 3.02, 5.03, and 3.67, and then 2.27. So what is the difference? The difference is the chemicals, the conformation. The conformation of the particular molecule really determines the chemical shift value. Okay, so that's the point. Because in a different conformer, the lone pair will be present in a different chemical environment, and that chemical environment really dictates the electron density, and then that will dictate the chemical shift values. So this is same for even carbon-13 NMR signals also. Even though I have explained with regard to the proton chemical shift value, so the similar type of effects are also observed in the case of carbon-13 NMR signals. The strong conformational dependence of chemical shift of proton on adjacent hetero atoms. So this is the point that you should remember. And then steric factors again can play into the role. And then again you can see here that it is just a cyclohexanol type, and then it is a I'm not sure, it is a boat form, right? So you can see here 2 hydrogen atoms. And suppose one of the hydrogen axial hydrogen is replaced with a methyl group, then that means there is a steric factor, and then the steric factor is influenced on the other hydrogen, the chemical shift value of the other proton. You can see here it is 3.45. The other case it is 3.65. It is 0.2 is the difference in chemical shift value. So there are many other examples are given here. You can easily make out all these things, that it is just a toluene, and then you have a trimethyl, right? So trimethyl group is here. So again, you can find that there is a clear difference in chemical shift value because of the steric factor. So all these examples are published in reputed journals, and then those journals are cited here. You can see that. So the point is that the steric factors can influence to some extent the chemical shift values on the neighboring protons. That's the point one should remember. So this particular slide, you can see that the total parameters, various parameters that influence the chemical shift values. So these are the different points that I have listed here. Most of the things that we have discussed is with regard to the anisotropy. Okay, so electronegativity we have discussed, and a couple of other things that we will discuss, like isotopic effect, unpaired electron, solvent, temperature, all those things we will see in the next slide. So this is an example given that the isotope can also can affect the chemical shift value. This is not a proton NMR, but then with regard to some other, with regard to the nitrogen 15 NMR, it is given here that you can see a clear difference in chemical shift value when you find the isotopes. So these details are not really necessary, but you can just remember that the isotope can really contribute to some extent the chemical shift value to change either plus side or minus side. That's the point you just remember. These are all generally I used to discuss for the research students, but for you it is not so important. That's what I'm skipping some of the points. Right. Similarly, the electron pairs. So normally NMR is not suitable for the paramagnetic compounds. So this is primarily because of the dipole-dipole interactions, and then we always see the because especially the transition metal complex, 3D transition metal complex, there are many compounds where they show the paramagnetism. Such a compound normally NMR is not suitable. Why? Because their chemical shift values will be out of the range when you are really talking about the proton NMR. So if you are talking about some other NMR, then it may come into the place, but then proton NMR, as you remember that it is maximum, the scale is minus 0.5, minus 4.5 to 15 or 16. Okay, so that is the scale, or maximum 20 ppm, that's all. But then when you see a lone pair of electrons, what happens that we lone pair means when you see electrons, single electron, unpaired electrons, so they contribute more to the magnetic field, and that means that we will find higher magnetic moments, and as a result that particular compound will shift more. I mean, the scale will be much more. It's not confined to only the 20 ppm, so it will go to even beyond 20 ppm. That's the problem. So as a result, that we don't see such effect in our routine experiment of while recording the proton NMR. If you are recording carbon 13, perhaps you can find such a result. But in the routine experiment, that when you are dealing with the proton NMR, if you have a paramagnetic compound, so it's not that it is not interacting, it is affecting. The chemical shift values are affected when you have an unpaired electron. But we don't see, because it is something like just imagine that you are watching something through a window. Okay, you are watching something through a window. Through a window, you can see a limited region, but something which is happening outside the window, you can't really make it out. Am I right? If you are watching something through a window or a door, you can really find what is happening through the window in that particular region. But outside the window, what exactly is happening, we really don't know. Likewise, when you have a single electron, paramagnetic compounds will show large dipole large magnetic moments. That means the strong magnetic field. So they will stretch. They will resonate at a higher frequencies. So those things that we can't find it in the NMR, in the routine proton NMR spectroscopy. Okay, so that's the reason that whenever you come across metal complex, don't give NMR. This is a general thing that everybody tells. Okay, so if metal complex, if you prepare as a part of your inorganic chemistry, then if it is a paramagnetic, then the NMR is not used for characterizing the technique, characterizing such a molecule. Why? Because this is the reason that you can't say really what is happening. Okay, so the best example is given, one particular example is given. I'm not sure what compound it is exactly, but you can really make it out that it is one compound NMR spectrum, right? You can see it should confine to this region, the proton NMR spectrum. But then the effects are actually gone outside the region, and then you can see that it has gone up to 140 region. And the chemical shift values also, the NMR peaks also will be broadened. So there are two reasons. That one is that due to the large magnetic moments, then these chemical shift values of unpaired electrons, when an unpaired electron is present, such a proton NMR signals are highly de-shielded. So normally we found more than 100. Okay, that is one thing. Second thing is that even if you come across such a protons, even if you are able to tune the machine, the spectrometer, and then you can record it. It's not that you can't do it. You can do it. Even though if you record it, then these lines are broadened. You can see here. So when the lines are broadened, then it is always problematic. Any spectroscopic technique, if the lines are broadened, then it is very difficult to assign the peaks to a particular thing, because within a broad region there may be a possibility of more than one proton. So they both merge together. So you don't really interpret the. You find it difficulty to interpret the spectrum. Spectral information to your molecular structure, right? And this is where that we can discuss the shift reagent is somewhat similar to this, and there are so many physical aspects. I will not touch upon the physical aspect, but you can just remember that you have maybe some hexanol, okay, or hexanol. Just remember that hexanol, that it's a 6-membered aliphatic compound, and it has a OH group at the terminal position, and hexanol. And just alpha carbon, alpha to the OH. Just imagine that you have. Maybe I can draw here. So 1, 2, or maybe I should elaborate. CH3, CH2, CH2. Can you tell me, anyone, what is the hexanol chemical formula other than Kuntal? Is it right? Hexanol means a 5-member ring, right? 5 carbon atoms, right, or wrong? Okay, you just see that. Okay, so this is alpha. We say it is alpha, right? This is beta. This is gamma, delta. Okay, likewise we give the terminology. Okay, fine. Now you want to record the NMR spectrum, or let us try to sorry, this should be the opposite way, the scale. So this is the NMR spectra we are trying to predict for this compound. So this CH2 is close to what? OH, heteroatom. So where we can find this CH2 proton? So you know the structure. So alpha carbon, you have 2 protons, CH2 protons. Beta carbon, 2 protons. Gamma carbon, 2 protons, right? So everywhere you have 2 protons except that methyl, the last carbon atom that you have methyl, right? You have how many CH2 groups are there? Can you tell?
5.
So there are 5.
5.
Yeah. So 5 CH2 groups are there. What will be their position? Approximate position of those 5 CH2 protons. Can anybody tell? Approximate position. You need not to be very accurate. You can just give some approximate positions. Anybody? Okay, so this is the one, right? OH. OH protons, we will come to this later, this subject, OH. But these 5 protons where we come across, where we see. Okay, so this one is, what is the general range? I told you that CH2 protons.
The alpha CH2 will come around approximately 3.
Okay, what is the, I asked what is the general aliphatic methylene proton chemical shift value?
1.5 or 1.6.
Correct. So it's a typical range is that when you don't find any kind of heteroatom adjacent to it. But here there is an electronegative atom, oxygen atom is there. As a result, it will be upfield or downfield. It will be
Downfield.
It will be downfield, right? So it will be downfield. You can find somewhere around 3 or 3.5. What about the next beta carbon methylene protons? Okay, what will be the next proton? Next thing. So you will find at 3. This is, let's say it is 3. This is 2, and this is 1. Okay, and this is 4. Okay, I'm trying to basically predict the approximate NMR spectrum of one hexanol. Is it clear? Now, so if you see that first one will be seen somewhere here, one peak. What about the next one?
Just beside that.
Beside means on the right hand side or
right,
left hand side?
Right.
On the right hand side, because it is somewhat far from the heteroatom, that is electronegativity oxygen atom. As a result, that it will be seen upfield. So the point of what I want to discuss is that it will be seen at 3, the adjacent alpha carbonate methylene group, one peak here, and then the other one will be seen here. Okay, the other one will be seen here, the other one will be seen here, the other one will be seen here, the other one will be seen here. The point is this, as you move away from the hetero functional group, that is OH, what happens is that all the CH2 protons will resonate at one particular place. Okay, so except this particular one, okay, which is connected directly to the OH functional group. So the rest of the things will come very broadly, all the jig, it will come. So when you come across such kind of situation, now, how do you exactly interpret the spectrum? Is it possible to interpret the spectrum? Suppose if all peaks are coupled together, and then is it possible? So definitely it is not, right? So that is where this particular concept of shift reagent are useful. Okay, the shift reagents. There are certain compounds like lanthanides and actinides. These they form, they coordinate and then form nice complexes with organic compound which are having either oxygen atom or nitrogen atom as a donor site. Okay, so only criteria is that our molecule, organic compound, should have either oxygen or nitrogen atom. So these, for example, promethium, europium, this kind of some rare earth, the lanthanide complexes. So lanthanide ligands, basically they form the nice metal complexes with these compound, organic compound, which are having either oxygen or nitrogen donor sites. And then such a proton, such a complex, then you take it to the NMR spectrum and then record the NMR spectrum. So what happens? The scale will be broad, basically stretched apart, and then all these things, what we see, all these CH2 protons which are clumsy at one place, resonating at one place, now it will be stretched apart, and then as a result, then it will be easy for us to interpret the NMR spectrum. The idea of chemical shift reagents in NMR spectroscopy is basically to stretch the NMR scale and to assign the geometry of the molecular structure to a particular molecule in an easy manner. That's a concept it is, right? And I give you one example here. I think I have something. This is not exactly, yeah. I think I have here. I forgot this. I unnecessarily wasted some time over there. Fine. So you can just see here that there are alpha, beta, gamma. There are different protons are resonating. In this one, you can see here in the down one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many are there? 5. So, but then you have how many protons? The hexanol you have more, right? So 1, 2. So there are 6 carbon atoms are there, and they are since here these two protons and these two signals actually if you find it, so there are two signals like this gamma 1 and then delta 1. Gamma and delta protons are actually coupled together and they are resonating at one particular place. So you can see in this spectrum. So once you add the chemical the shift reagents and then if you record the NMR spectrum, what exactly happens is that this one where the gamma methylene group and then beta delta methylene groups are merged together, they are now well separated, right? So this becomes easy to interpret the to assign the peaks and then to assign the molecular structure to a particular compound from the NMR data. Okay, just very simple that here that two protons are clumsy coupled together, but when you add the chemical shift reagent to your NMR sample and then if you record it, then things will be very clear and then it will resolve the peaks very nicely and we can easily interpret the chemical shift. We can easily interpret the NMR peaks to the molecular structure. Okay. Of course, the broadening is a major issue, and then the how the chemical shifts are working. This is somewhat similar to the paramagnetic compound which I discussed previously. So when you have electron, all these lanthanides and actinides, they have the electrons, single electrons, so they are paramagnetic. So as I told you that when you add to these organic compounds, they basically chelate with the nitrogen or oxygen present in our organic compound, and as a result the peaks are basically well resolved because that they resonate at a higher chemical shift, higher frequency, so they will resolve. But the problem is that the peak is going to be very much broader, and that is that particular thing. And now we'll see the temperature effect, and temperature has a very significant role in NMR spectroscopy, and the peak, as you increase the temperature of a NMR sample and or the experiment, if you are conducting an experiment, NMR experiment at a different temperature, as you increase the temperature, the peak becomes broader. Okay, the peak becomes broaden, and then the peak becomes sharp, and then you will lose a certain information. Okay, and again the broadening is another issue. So as the temperature, if your temperature is increasing, there are two things that there are many times that we ourselves will vary the temperature of a sample such that we want to see some kind of chemical changes. That is one thing. But suppose during the experiment there are certain parameters which can contribute to the chemical shift values. Okay, for example, that we use a radio frequency pulse, and then we use the decouplers and then spin locking pulses to basically to perform the NMR experiment as a part of a routine experimental procedure. So these steps actually can cause little bit of heat to the sample. So such a situation that normally what happens that the peaks will be broadened and then the information will be lost. So one has to remember that. So keeping this as a tool, that there are people that they were exploiting this particular thing in getting or in obtaining some information. For example, especially with regard to the biology sample like a DNA. What is that? DNA single strand to double strand denaturation. So these information can be easily monitored through the NMR. So this is something that very interesting. Like you remember, a simple spectrophotometer can be used, and we can follow the absorption changes to monitor certain information, right? And we can extract, we can use it for various information. So likewise, the NMR chemical shift changes with regard to the temperature can be used to determine the structure of a protein. This is a very hot research area which has been which is continuously many people are studying, and structure can be determined. And then you can also do some kinetics experiment. I mean, how much denaturation, you know that the single strand to double strand conversion, as you increase the temperature of a DNA, basically it goes from one conformer to the other conformer, single strand to double strand to single strand. This conformation will change, dynamics is to change. Now the question is that how much time it is taking. If you want to really estimate, then NMR is one of the good tool to in fact there are many people, they have done a lot of interesting experiment using the NMR. And you know, the peak width of NMR directly proportional to the spin lattice relaxation time, and that is the time that kinetics means what? Basically it is the measuring the time, right? So by measuring the peak widths of NMR signals, one can really determine the molecular structure, and then one can also determine how much time it is taking to take from one particular conformation to the other conformation. So that is another thing. And then one can calculate from there the reaction rates, and various other things can be explored. So this is really interesting research area people are really interested in, and especially biology, biochemistry people are really using this very useful information. So the chemical shifts, as you increase the temperature, you can see here there are dramatic changes as with the temperature changes, and these changes can be in fact utilized to monitor, to determine the protein structure, and then to follow certain conformational changes, to what extent they are, how fast they are happening or how slow they are happening. That means basically you can determine the dynamics and reaction rates also, how much time it is taking. So those are all things that you can really follow using the NMR. And the effect of solvent, we have, well, now what will be the effect of a solvent? Just imagine that we have a NMR, we have so many NMR solvent, and I have given a broad description of what type of solvents are to be taken. I mentioned there itself that we normally use deuterium solvent, a deuterated solvent. We don't use solvents as such, because most of the solvents are having the what is that? The proton, and the proton, suppose if you are interested in the proton NMR spectroscopy, we cannot definitely use the proton, because the solvent peak is solvent proton content is going to affect our measurements, and it is going to interfere with our measurement. Therefore it is preferred that one will go, normally we prefer to take NMR solvent, a deuterated NMR solvent, not the direct solvent. Okay, deuterated water, deuterated DMSO, deuterated acetone, deuterated chloroform. So these are the common solvent we will be taking. Now suppose if I take a one compound and then dissolve in different deuterated solvent, if I record the NMR spectrum, what will happen? So what kind of changes that we come across? Ideally there should not be any change, but then due to various other reasons that we will see some kind of chemical shift variation. What I mean is that suppose ethanol, you just take ethanol is your compound, and you are trying to record its NMR spectrum in different solvents like water, DMSO, acetone, whatever it is listed on the table. You just imagine that we are interested in recording ethanol spectrum in these 5 solvents. Now ideally the ethanol is ethanol, and we are doing you are recording the NMR spectrum of ethanol in different solvents. So the chemical shift value of a OH proton in ethanol should not vary irrespective of the other one, right? Ideally that is what should happen, but then because all these solvents are different, and then the ethanol molecule is interacting differently with these solvents, So now normally we encounter a slight changes in the chemical shift value for a given nuclei, whether it is a OH nuclei or CH3 nuclei or CH2 nuclei in an ethanol molecule, right? So these effects, what we see generally are not very huge, but then to some extent, maximum they will be within 1 ppm. Okay, so the changes won't be more than 1 ppm. So their changes will be within 1 ppm as compared to one solvent to the other solvent. And these, but why these changes are seen? So CH2 proton should not change, or methyl proton signal should not change. But still, we encounter all these changes primarily because of these reasons. Okay, what are those reasons? The polarity of the solvent is different. Molecular shape of the solvent is different. Sometimes the aromaticity of the solvent can cause some effect. To some extent, the aromaticity of the solvent will contribute to the change in chemical shift values. And similarly, these interactions, because of the polarity, because of the molecular shape, all those things. So we always come across this kind of interactions. A molecule can interact with the solvent in various ways, like ion dipole, hydrogen bonding, dipole-dipole. So there are several interactions. All these interactions can actually cause a maximum of 1 ppm change in of a compound chemical shift values when you are recording in different solvents. Okay, so the polarity and then shape of the solvent and aromaticity are the primary reasons for the observing the different chemical shift values for a given compound. Okay, now there are ways that you can really estimate exactly, precisely how much chemical shift value one can basically expect when we are going from one solvent to the other solvent. That all depends upon all these parameters, like it depends upon the bulk susceptibility, which is shown with the delta B, right? And then anisotropy, and then also the reaction field, hydrogen bonding, van der Waals interaction. So these are the 5 different parameters that can really contribute into the chemical shift value of a compound when you are recording in a particular solvent. Okay, so what is its susceptibility? What kind of susceptibility is there? And then anisotropy, whether it is anisotropy or not, and reaction field. Okay, that means basically whether it is a what is the dielectric constant of the medium, and then the hydrogen bonding, whether it is there or not, if it is there, to what extent, van der Waals interaction. So all these parameters can contribute, which are basically the solvent parameters, which can contribute to chemical shift. I told you previously there are a couple of things you have to by heart and memorize with regard to NMR spectroscopy. And again, I'm going to tell you one more thing here, that this point I have broadly covered. In detail, I have covered there in the second or third lecture of NMR. Basically, there is a proton called residual proton, right? So I told you that the NMR experiments are conducted in the solution phase in a deuterated solvents. And when you do the deuteration, that deuteration is not 100%. So to some extent, maximum it will be deuterated molecules, but then to some extent there will be residual protons which are not deuterated. So this is a technical problem that is there with all sorts of solvent, whether it is a acetic acid D4 or acetone D4. When you're trying to convert the acetone to deuterated acetone, then so all the acetone molecules do not convert. All the acetone protons, 6 protons, do not convert directly into the deuterium. There are certain few acetone molecule, or certain amount of, a certain percentage of acetone molecules which remain in the acetone molecules as it is, and they don't convert it into the acetone D6, right? So that depends upon the solvent. Similarly, chloroform D. Okay, deuterium oxide, that is D2O. So water and deuterium oxide. So water can be made into deuterium oxide. So this the leftover molecules, what we call it as a residual molecule, and these are leftover residual molecular protons, we call it as a residual protons. And these residual protons are primarily responsible for giving a very intense peak in the NMR spectrum. Okay, because I told you that you are going to take a small volume of roughly about 0.4 to 0.6 ml of the deuterated solvent in the NMR tube, and then you involve your, just add your compound in the tube, and then add your solvent. Then this volume of solvent will have a few molecules of the nascent the molecule, I mean pristine molecules will be there, and these residual protons will give very intense peak in the thing. Okay, so that is very important. One has to remember that that we call it as a solvent peak actually. So depending upon the solvent that you are choosing, then they will give you the residual proton signal will be seen at different locations. For example, if you take a acetic acid D4, it is a deuterated solvent, but then deuterated solvent will have a deuterated the residual proton, and this proton will give you a very unique peak at 11.6 ppm, 65 ppm, 11.65 ppm. Likewise, the acetone, suppose acetone D6, if you are using as a solvent, then its residual proton will be seen 2.6, very intense peak, you will see at 2.04 ppm, right? And then acetonitrile will be seen somewhere around 1.9. Acetonitrile, that methyl proton is there, right? That methyl proton will be seen over there. And then benzene D6, so this is 7.15. right? And then chloroform D. So this is something that I have already explained, that 7.26 or 7.25 is very unique peak of chloroform. Chloroform D is the widely used NMR solvent. For most of the compounds, it is really nice, very nice solvent in terms of solubility. Okay. Now, deuterium oxide, suppose if you are using water, deuterated water, it will show a residual proton at 4.65. So these are the different positions. As you can see, there are different deuterated solvent on the left hand side is listed, and their chemical shift values from the TMS is shown here. And I suggest you that you have to remember these things. If you want to really interpret the NMR data, the given NMR data, you have to remember this, because you can't really, while interpreting, you will think that this is coming from the solvent, coming from your compound proton. Unless you really remember these things, that you cannot really make it out. Okay, you cannot really make it out whether it is from your compound or from the solvent. You should have a knowledge. We should have a knowledge. Okay, if you see, while okay, if I give a spectrum, I say that usually most of the NMR data, it is represented. It is by default they will give the solvent also while representing. Okay, so which instrument it is used? It is a 400, 300. That is one thing. It is a proton data, data, or 13 carbon data, or 15 nitrogen data. So those details will be there. They will clearly mention it. And then solvent also they will be mentioning. So once the solvent is mentioned, for the sake of the user to rule out this confusion, that whether it is a solvent or your compound, that you can easily make it out, because you should have this knowledge. Once you have this knowledge, you can rule out the possibility of 7.26 if you see a peak, very intense one, and if you are not aware of this particular the positions of the residual protons, then you will be thinking, oh, this is one proton is there, one very intense singlet is there, what could be it is? You will be breaking your head. But on the other hand, if you remember these numbers, then okay, 7.26, I can easily neglect it, because that is solvent. I remember that this is a solvent, so I can remove. Suppose if you see a peak at 4.65, okay, 4.65, very short peak, probably this is solvent peak due to deuterium oxide. And just check the description of the data given to you. Usually they will write it, that chloroform or deuterium oxide or acetone D6, those details will be there. And then from there you can just immediately rule out the possibility and then such a peak, and then you can go ahead in interpreting the other spectral peaks to your molecular structure. Okay, so this is another important thing that you should remember if you want to really be the master in assigning the NMR data. So definitely you have to remember the chemical shift values, and there is no excuse, and then this is also important. Okay, and then let me go to directly to the last topic of discussion, that is the effect of the solvent. The effect of solvent is very very interesting topic, and then especially we have a couple of hydrogen bonding labile protons are there. So for example, that in your compound, if you have a OH, so OH can present in a phenols or alcohols, and then OH can present in a carboxylic acids, right? Similarly, you can also have a primary and a secondary means where you will see NH protons, and similarly you can find a thiol, right? So there are three different protons that we do come across in organic chemistry, which we call it as a labile proton. So they can be exchanged with the protons in the given solvent. That's why we say it is those are labile protons. So these where do we see the chemical shift values of these labile protons? That is the topic of discussion, and how the solvent actually affecting these labile protons in the NMR spectroscopy. This is also important. I'm sure that the similar type of description or discussion will be there with regard to FTIR spectrum as well. Okay, they are also very very important, that hydrogen bonding, how it is affecting. So it is an intramolecular or intermolecular. So these are also very important subject. Now, the first and foremost point is that the NH and OH protons will be found in a wide range. You cannot find in a specified position, right? So you will find in a wide range, anywhere they can come. It is not very precisely, okay, you will find this. No, they can be found in anywhere in between some region. Those regions are, I will discuss. Okay, that is one thing. So this is primarily because they are prone to involve in the hydrogen bonding. That is the primary thing. Suppose if you don't have the hydrogen bonding, suppose if your solvent, I just mentioned the previous slide that NMR solvent, if it's neat and if it doesn't have any kind of other OH related stuff, for example, like moisture, if moisture is not there, then we say it is a neat solvent. In the neat solvent, usually we find the chemical shift value for OH proton is roughly between 1 to 2 ppm. Anywhere you can find it. On the other hand, it is highly difficult that that you will normally we buy a deuterated solvent of 100 ml or 500 ml bottle from the Sigma Aldrich or any chemical vendor. Then we will open the bottle and then use it 1 time, 2 time, 3 times. Okay, as the time passes, then this particular solvent will be contaminated or will be exposed to the moisture. Either way, either through the syringes which you are using, or through when you open the cap, then it will get exposed to the atmosphere. There, the protons, there the there the water molecules get enter into the solvent, they mix up, and then it is contaminated, right? So you can still use that. There is no issue to record the NMR spectrum, but then they will give some additional peak. So that knowledge one should have it. Nobody buy each and every time a sealed bottle, but then we continue, we use it over a month of time, or sometimes it may be more than a month of time. So the point is that if it is neat, if the solvent, whether it is a deuterated solvent, deuterated chloroform, or deuterated benzene, or whatever it is, if it is neat, then OH proton, suppose if in your compound, if there is a OH, Okay, such a proton, OH proton, you can find at 1.1 to 2 ppm. But if that is not the case, if you can't, if you are not using a neat solvent, then naturally its signal can be found anywhere between 1 to 5. Okay, so this remember that if you are using a neat solvent, sometimes there are people, they are very good and they give these details. Neat solvent they mention. Okay, neat means that there is no other impurity. That is the meaning. So in such a situation, that you will find the OH proton somewhere around 1 to 2. Otherwise you will find anywhere between this, because they started, you have a moisture, and then the moisture, that OH protons are there, water, and they get exchanged continuously with the OH proton of your compound. So as a result, it can be found anywhere. That is the result. OH and then NH protons are downfield, and then OH proton, both OH and NH proton, usually this proton signal will be downfield. You will find in the downfield region if there is a hydrogen bond. Okay, so hydrogen bonding is facilitated by, you all know very well that the polar solvent like DMSO, acetone, and all those ethanol, methanol, all these things are the polar solvent. The polar solvent, they basically enhance the effect of hydrogen bonding. So the polar solvent, the hydrogen bonding will be effective. Therefore, the OH bond will be affected, and then its chemical shift value will be further downfield. We will found further downfield region as compared to a solvent where there is no as compared to a solvent which is non-polar in nature, right? And then the best example is that the acidic protons. Okay, acidic protons, I mean the carboxylic acid and NH protons, they will be found at a higher because they are forming the hydrogen bonds. And then carboxylic amides and then sulfonamides, NH protons are shifted well downfield of the related amines. Remember this. So amides, okay, carboxylic amide and then sulfonamide, they will be found as compared to the primary and secondary amines, they will be further found in downfield. Similarly, the OH group of phenols and the carboxylic acids are found downfield region as compared to alcohol. So alcohol will be right hand side. So, but then phenols and then carboxylic acid protons will be there. You have OH group, and those OH group will be OH protons will be found at the left hand side. That means the downfield side of the NMR spectrum, right? Of course, that there are ways that you can really remove. If you want to record a NMR spectrum of a given compound in a neat solvent, one can actually flush with the nitrogen so that the moisture can go out, or sometimes we can do the deuterium exchange, and then one can record the NMR spectrum if you want to record it. Okay, so this is just to show you how the ethanol molecule NMR spectrum is OH chemical shift of ethanol is changing with respect to the percentage of its percentage in a given solvent, and then it is done in a chloroform solvent. So there are 4 different instances where the CCl4 we are trying to record the spectrum, and then here there is a neat, as you can see here in the neat NMR spectrum of ethanol, that you can really find the splitting pattern. Oh, sorry. In the neat NMR spectrum of ethanol, you can find nice splitting pattern even for the OH. That is very important. In the neat only that is possible. The other cases it is not possible. So we will always see a broad spectrum rather than a sharp splitted spectrum. That is one thing. And in this case, that the solvent, the effect of solvent is basically, in all the cases it is a CCl4, but then the percentage of ethanol is basically is changed from 0.5% to 10%. So essentially, that as you go from this from the bottom to the up, here the non-polar solvent content is actually decreasing. So the downfield of OH shift as non-hydrogen bonding solvent decreases, right? So we will see. You can see the point. What I'm trying to say is that as you if and in this neat means there is no CCl4, all right? So here so the OH proton is here uh, when you have very less amount of ethanol in a given non-hydrogen bonding CCl4, and when the ethanol percentage increased in the same CCl4 and the OH proton is seen here, and then when basically the CCl4 content is reducing and then ethanol content is increasing as you go from bottom to up. That means as you decrease the non-hydrogen bonding solvent, okay, so the OH proton is basically moving from right hand side to the left hand side. That is the thing. Here it is, and then here it is. So this is one thing that you should remember. And alcohol protons, for example, that the OH protons in alcohol generally found especially in phenols, it is 5 to 7. That is the region. And again, it depends upon the solvent. If it is in CDCl3, that is the composition. And if it is in DMSO6, the chemical shift values are found 9 to 11 ppm, right? You can see here that is one very significant feature of OH proton or NH proton or SH proton is this. Please remember that these protons will be you cannot find them as a very short peak. They will be seen as a broad peak. Again, the reason is this, that they start exchange with the solvent OH protons, right? And if you have if the solvent is not neat, then there is a presence of OH, and then the OH protons are getting exchanged with these OH protons in the given carboxylic acid or the phenol or alcohol. As a result, you can see here they are not short, they are very broad, right? So this is one indication. Whenever you come across a broad peak, then immediately you should suspect there is something, okay, level proton that can be a OH or NH or SH. This is something that immediately you should come to a conclusion. And then based on see the position where it is, where you are observing. Based on that, again, you can come to further conclusion, whether it is 1 to 5 or 2 to 4. So what kind of thing is? So that is another way of going proceeding further to solve the structure. So if it is 1 to 5, then it is this, and then there is a peak at above 5, which is broad, then definitely it can be a phenol. Okay, and then you also have to look at sometimes the broad peak can also present, if you are using a DMSO as a solvent, the broad peak can be found even after 9. Okay, so these are some of the indications or indicators to solve the chemical structure, right? That is one thing. Another thing is that whenever we come across, this is a peculiar behavior and very rare behavior. Normally, we don't see the carboxylic acid. I already mentioned that it can go up to 12 or 13, but you can't really find a system where it's their chemical shift values are seen beyond 13 or so. Very rarely. So one of the rare compound is this. So you have acetyl acetone. I'm sure that most of you know that this is called acetyl acetone, and this acetyl acetone can undergo this kind of ketoenol tautomerism, right? Acetyl acetone can undergo this kind of ketoenol tautomerism, and this OH proton, okay, enol form, usually acetyl acetone present in both conformers, and it can be present in a keto form as well as the enol form. Certain amount of acetyl acetone will be present in keto form, and then certain amount of acetyl acetone is present in a enol form. That depends. Okay, so there is an equilibrium exists between both of them. Now, the point I want to bring to you is that this OH proton, okay, this OH proton of ketoenol tautomer will be seen at very high chemical shift values. How much it is? It is 15.84, which is very, very high. Okay, so whenever you come across these dicarbonyl compounds, and definitely there is a possibility of ketoenol tautomerism, and then these chemical shift values will be seen at very high thing. This is primarily because of the the hydrogen bonding between these two, right? This is primarily because the hydrogen intramolecular hydrogen bonding is primarily responsible for that. And there are a couple of examples I have shown here that this is another compound where the hydrogen bonding, intramolecular hydrogen bonding is there. And then this actually, because of this, then what happened that the electron density of the hydrogen atom is decreased, and you will see it in a much more de-shielded region. Okay, so likewise, you can continue the discussion to amines as well, and amine and amide protons, and NH2 protons are primary alkyl amines. Typically appear somewhere, and again, I told you this point, it is broad, and you can find it in between 1 to 2 ppm in CDCl3. And ammonium salt, the proton is there. That NH proton signal will be highly and strongly downfield shifted, and typically it appears in 4.7 ppm CDCl3. And in DMSO, it is further downfield shifted, and it is generally found at 8 to 9 ppm. And then NH protons of phenyl are typically seen 3.5 to 4.5 in CDCl3. Okay, and when it comes to this one, you will see this. And one peculiar behavior one should remember, that the broadening of NH protons can also not only from the labile nature of the proton, but it also could be due to the exchange, due to the exchange, and also due to the nature of the nitrogen. What I'm trying to say that nitrogen is 14. Nuclei is magnetically active. I'm sure that most of you remember this, right? Nitrogen is a magnetically active, right? And proton is a magnetically active. I hope that you are following that. You have nitrogen and then NH, okay? You have NH in the NH or NH2, we have nitrogen and the hydrogen. Both are magnetically active. So they are also, there is a possibility that they can couple, right? Both are magnetically active, they can couple. So this coupling can also, one of the reason for observing a broad peak in the case of amines, primary and the secondary amines, and also the amides, right? So this also please try to remember. And when it comes to the thiols, again similar discussion that the thiol protons doesn't show much broad nature as like NH and then the OH proton. These effects are very small. And the SH protons of alkyl thiols typically appear in 1.2 and 2 in CDCl3. And the hydrogen bondings it doesn't show, so that is why that we don't see the very strong effects as like the amine and amide and carboxylic acid phenols. That is one thing. Aryl thiol SH signals are further downshifted. So this is quite obvious that suppose if you have aromatic ring which is nearby, then definitely such a OH proton will be, and SH proton signal will be further downfielded because of the ring current, right? So that's it. And then again pH, there are not many examples, but there are a few examples where the pH can also depend upon the chemical shift values. So with this, for today, discussion is over. If you are really interested, the pH discussion, you can go ahead, and there is it is beyond the scope of your subject. That's what I'm not touching. Couple of points. So whatever it is there, so those things I have really explained, like solvent effect, OH bond, OH and H. Those things are there in your syllabus. This pH and other things are not there. If you are really interested, probably these things maybe we can discuss as a part of the elective if you are interested to take in the next semester as the instrumentation methods of chemical analysis. Okay, so those which are I have skipped, for example, NMR chemical shift reagents, that I did not explain too much because I know that is beyond the scope of this particular topic. So with this, for today, I have completed this discussion of chemical shift. and how these chemical shifts are affected with various parameters. And over the last 3 lectures, we have been discussing this one. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. And tomorrow onwards, we will see the spin-spin coupling. Maybe before that, maybe we will try to practice a couple of problems. And we have discussed many other things. Maybe I will start, interpreting a couple of simple systems, and then we will go to the discussion of spin-spin splitting and chemical and magnetic equivalence, and also the different spin systems like AX, AB, and then AMX, and then different spin systems, how they behave. Those things we will see. So if you have any questions, you can please unmute your mic and ask. Otherwise, we can stop today. Yes,
sir. In
Yeah,
our
who's that?
machine, sir, I am Kuntal.
Tell me, Kuntal.
In our machine, we have liquid hydrogen, liquid nitrogen, helium. So we have to do the measurement in very low temperature. And today we have seen that the measurement is various temperature up to 60 degrees Celsius. How it is possible?
I mean, this is there are possible. There is a system what we call a Peltier. Peltier is a the physics, right? Peltier effect. Based on that, based on the Peltier effect, most of the instruments, if you want to carry out the experiment at low temperature or high temperature, we will have this Peltier system will be coupled. Okay, so that through which we can vary the temperature and decrease the temperature, and you can perform it. Absolutely no problem. Whatever the temperature, you can go even low temperature also, even minus 100. You have seen the data, right? So they have recorded the NMR spectrum even at minus 150. That all the cases. Some of the time, if you go lower on the lower temperature, the signal resolution will be good. So if you can go through the fine details, that the population difference actually will be good. Population difference will increase as you lower the temperature. That's where you can actually increase the resolution of NMR data. So that is a part of the physical chemistry, which I did not touch upon, but just remember that as you go down, as you lower the temperature of your system, you can improve the resolution. Why? Because that the Boltzmann distribution actually is the primary reason where the population difference actually will increase. So the number of transitions, if the population difference is more, the number of transitions will be more, and then the better the signal.
Okay. Then hydrogen bonds means that the carbonyl CO group, the oxygen is donating its electron density to the hydrogen, right?
Hydrogen is donating or hydrogen is withdrawing, which is electronegative?
Hydrogen is accepting the electron density from the oxygen.
Oh, is it so? Or the hydrogen bonding, that's how it happens, or the electronegative atom will takes the electron from the hydrogen? Which one is correct?
Sir, I don't know actually. That's why I'm asking.
The hydrogen bonding atom, that you should have a hydrogen and then electronegative atom. Typically, it is a nitrogen or oxygen, which are highly electronegative than the hydrogen. Okay, so these are, because of the electronegativity, they pull the electron towards themselves, right? And then you will find that less electron density or cloud around a particular hydrogen nuclei. So we already discussed at the beginning on various lectures. In the previous lecture, we discussed that whatever the effect it may be, if the electron density around a particular nucleus is decreasing, then such a proton will be resonating at a higher frequency. That means higher chemical shift value.
Sir, hydrogen has only one electron and it is bonded towards another oxygen. Then how it is possible to drag the electron density by the another oxygen atom?
You mean to say that it is mostly located that part, but then there is some effect which is already part, It is bonded, that's true, but then the electron density, so what is a bond? What is a bond?
Electron
bond
density.
Yeah, electron density. So mostly seen in between O and H. Okay, but then it doesn't mean that electron density is not there in another location, right? That electron density, if it is withdrawing some effect, so that itself will contribute, right? What is the shape of the s orbital?
Spherical. Symmetrical.
It is understood, no? So it is not at located in a particular direction to say that electron density is not there in the other direction.
Yes, sir. Sir, at this moment, how many solvent signal we have to remember? At this moment, how many solvent signal we have to remember?
Some of the known, like chloroform, DMSO, D6, water, acetonitrile, like that. Maybe 4 or 5 you can remember. Chloroform, acetonitrile, DMSO, D6, water, sometimes acetone D6. These are very easy. That it's not very big task. You can easily remember. I mean, vaguely you have to remember. And you can easily, as we interpret the data, real data, you can easily make out. So if you have, you need not to really remember the exact numbers, but then you should have always that consciousness that, okay, there can be one peak at least in the spectrum. It can be a solvent peak in the real data. But if it is stimulated for the purpose of discussing the class in NMR, in the MSc class, normally we use a simulated data. So where you may not find the solvent peak. So most of the real data will have a solvent peak, absolutely, which you can easily distinguish.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so I think we can continue maybe in the next class. If you have any doubt, you can ask me. You can maybe Ravi is asking some question. Ravi, can I answer your next step, because already 1.5 hours and everybody will be scolding me. I took very long time.
No, sir, I'm not asking any question.
You're not asking?
No, sir, I just.
He is answering.
He is answering. Okay, fine.
There was hydrogen bonding, nothing, sir.
Okay, right. Okay, then we will see the next class tomorrow. Maybe again the same 4 to 5. We will mostly work on some problems, and it will be really exciting for everybody. I will give you few molecules, and then I will ask a few people to interpret the data. So be prepared and come and study the chemical shift values in the tables. So this is going to be real exercise. What I have discussed so far, you can really exercise and try to give. So that is what actually is required, or the purpose of this particular course. So tomorrow it is going to be exciting. So all of you try to come with the preparation, read those details, and then come. Otherwise, it is going to be a really boring job. Somebody will, like Kuntal will be answering, or Ravi, or maybe Ashwati will be answering. Other people like spectators. No, I don't want that. I will be asking most of the people's, maybe 2-3 people. I will ask one chemical structure to give the details. Okay, then see you. So we'll see mostly tomorrow 5 o'clock, and if there is a change, maybe I'll let you know. Bye.